Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Tuesday Night Grueling Truth Boxing Show, brought to you by Gridiron Mo, a new interactive football app where you get to call what you think the offense or defense should do during a live NFL game and see what all other fans have called also. Remember to check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. As always, I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I want to welcome back to the show my co-host, Dave Siderski.
Hey, Mike, how you doing? Good to talk with you tonight.
All right, same here, Dave. So our topic for tonight is going to be the top 10 middleweights in boxing history, correct?
Yes. And it should be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, you want to start us off with your number 10?
Yes, my number 10 is James Lights Out Toney. This one might be a little bit of a surprise. He didn't spend a lot of time at middleweight, but he did beat some pretty good fighters there, including Michael Nunn and future champion Reggie Johnson, and most importantly, the legendary Mike McCallum, who he won and drew against. He reigned, I believe, for about 2 years there, defended 6 times, and could have reigned there more extensively, really, had he chosen to stay at middleweight rather than move up in weight. And obviously the reason he's not rated higher on my list is that his tenure at middleweight was relatively brief.
Yeah, because he was fat, correct?
Eventually he was like a 230-pound guy at heavyweight.
Well, I liked him. I don't have him on my list. He retained his title with a draw against Mike McCallum, who was an old Mike McCallum by then. And then the second time he fought him, he won by a majority decision against an old McCallum again. I would tend to think that Mike McCallum was a better fighter in his prime than James Toney, and I don't have McCallum on my top 10 list either. But I think he was a heck of a fighter. I love the Michael Nunn upset. I think he was like a 20-1 underdog. Actually, that's a fight that, if you think about it, we probably should have. I don't even remember considering it when we did our top 10 upsets.
Right. He was pretty unknown at that point, and I think people at the time thought Michael Nunn was a little better than he actually was.
Well, they thought he was the second coming of Sugar Ray Leonard, I think, because, he danced around a lot, ran his mouth, threw some punches, but he was no Sugar Ray Leonard.
No.
And he is not on my top 10 list either. My number 10 is Tiger Flowers.
Okay.
Oh, you don't sound like you believe that, but all right. I think Flowers might be too low, or he could be too high, depending on who you ask. Technically a brilliant fighter. I had a little hard time saying fighter there. But Flowers had some flaws which separate him from some of the men in front of him. And his official losses, 10 came via stoppage, 9 of them came by way of being knocked out. While it can be pointed out that many of the guys he fought were larger men in terms of weight class. I think only Sam Langford and Kid Norfolk were the only men who were considerably larger than him when they actually fought. I think his chin was vulnerable, but he was a lot to me like Tommy Hearns or Terry Norris in more modern times. If one didn't get to it, they probably weren't going to win. And, if you didn't get to his chin, you weren't going to beat him. His sheer volume of fights was impressive. He beat the great Harry Greb. He mastered Mickey Walker. The Mickey Walker fight was a close fight where a lot of people actually had him winning. He was just a tough fighter that I think people forget. Like I said, I debated on whether to have him on my list or not, but he's there. So I don't know what your opinion on Tiger Flowers is, but
Tiger Flowers is not on my top 10. I definitely would have him in my top 20 and perhaps my top 15. Ironically, when I did my top 100 series, he was one of my last omissions. And, part of the reason for that was, his vulnerability to knockouts. As you said, he did beat Harry Greb twice, I believe. But I also believe that both of those were disputed in some respects. Great fighter. I falls a little short of the top 10 from my view.
So my only problem with that is you got James Toney there, and his best win was probably Michael Nunn. Tiger Flowers' best win was Harry Greb. Plus he beat Johnny Wilson, I believe, also.
I believe he did, yes.
Okay, so I am just stating my disagreement in writing right there.
That's okay. That's okay.
Who's your number 9?
My number 9 is Marcel Cerdan. And I struggled with my number 9 and 10. Probably changed it at least 2 or 3 times before finalizing it. Very, very talented fighter. Had an incredible record of 111 wins and 4 losses, 65 knockouts. Was the middleweight champion in France and Europe for a number of years. Before defeating Toney for the title. He also beat guys like Georgie Abrams and Holden Williams. He lost to Jake LaMotta, but he was fighting virtually one-armed for the entire fight. So who knows what would have happened had a healthy Marcel Cerdan been in the ring that night. And great fighter. He's not higher because his middleweight title reign was relatively brief, and a lot of the guys he fought earlier in his career are guys we never heard of.
Yeah,
but I overall he belongs.
He would be a guy that was just outside of mine. I can see why you got him there. My number 9, I've got Jake LaMotta. LaMotta beat him. I don't care what the excuse is. If he couldn't fight, he shouldn't have fought. So Daddy always told me, if you go out to play a sport and you're too hurt to play, you shouldn't be playing it. If you go out to play it, you shouldn't use it as an excuse. So, Jake LaMotta, I think he beat Sugar Ray Robinson. Hard to deny that. He beat Marcel Cerdan. They made the Raging Bull about him. But I don't know, Matt. I think the Raging Bull actually is a movie that may have hurt what people think about him, if that makes any sense. Because I don't think people realize what a good fighter he was. He fought Sugar Ray Robinson 6 times. He beat him once. It may not be people were beating Sugar Ray Robinson at that time. And I think, didn't he beat Robinson when Robinson was still a welterweight? Didn't they fight that at welterweight?
Yes. Yeah. I think that was like 1942 or 43, I believe.
I think it was 43. And then their final fight, the Valentine's Day Massacre, which is probably their most famous fight, was in 1951, I believe. But, he went, life and death against Sugar Ray Robinson, which is one of the greatest fighters ever lived. He beat Marcel Cerdan, who was actually my 9, 10, and 11 were, Tiger Flowers, Jake LaMotta, Marcel Cerdan. The difference with me between Cerdan and LaMotta was LaMotta beat him, number 1, plus LaMotta, on top of that, had beaten Sugar Ray Robinson, and I think that was just a higher quality of wins than what Cerdan had.
Yeah, Jake LaMotta, actually, he's not on my list, but he would have been my number 11. And he was the toughest guy for me to exclude. The reason he's not on, I think he lost 19 fights in his career out of, I believe, 106. Yes, he beat Sugar Ray Robinson, but he also lost to him 5 times. He wasn't a middleweight champion for very long.
Neither was Marcel Cerdan.
He beat Cerdan, I'll give you that, but he also struggled with a guy by the name of a Frenchman by the name of Laurent Dauthill.
Yeah.
In his first offense, and had to rally by winning by a desperation knockout to save the title.
Wouldn't that make him an even greater fighter? The fact that he could come back from something like that and win the fight. And Dauthill also previously beat LaMotta by decision before LaMotta even became champion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes styles make fights, as they say. He's a tough omission. He fell a little short from my view, but certainly one of the toughest fighters that ever lived, and just a tremendous chin. So I can't, I could see why you would have him in your top 10.
Well, what do you got at number 8?
Charley Bur. Part of the famed Murderers Row, a group of great African-American fighters from the 40s and 50s who were unjustly denied a shot at the world title. He fought literally a who's who of Hall of Famers, including, Fritzy Zivik, we beat twice, Coco Cato, we beat once, Holman Williams, 6-fight series, they each won 3. He even had a victory over Archie Moore. Burley could do everything in the ring. He could box, he could punch, he was an excellent defensive fighter. Word was that Sugar Ray Robinson avoided him. Whether that's true or not, I'm not quite sure. But, yeah, I think Charley Burley is one of the better fighters in boxing history to have never challenged for and never won a world championship belt, but certainly an all-time great.
Well, my number 8 also is Charley Burley, so we have no argument there.
All right.
And I believe Archie Moore called him the greatest fighter he ever faced. I believe it was
great
Archie
minds
Moore
think alike.
What you got at number 7?
Okay, moving. The toy bulldog, Mickey Walker.
Really? This is getting hairy.
Yes.
So do I. Seriously.
Yeah, jeez.
Not kidding. It's going to make for a really boring show.
We'll see what the rest holds. Yeah, he beat Tiger Flowers to win the title in, I believe, 1926. Defended, I think, 4 times before moving up to compete at higher weights. I don't want to talk about that too much because it's not specifically relevant to the middleweight division, but the fact that the guy could hold his own against the best light heavyweights and heavyweights of his era does speak something to the quality of the fighter. Wins over guys like Tiger Flowers, Dave Shade, who was a pretty good middleweight, Jock Malone, who he beat 4 times. One of the all-time great pound-for-pound fighters in boxing history, and one of the toughest fighters who's ever lived.
Yeah. Like I said, totally agree. My number 7 also. I think you just found out what my list was, and you wanted to hog all the time. But so what we're going to do, instead of letting you start all the time, I'm going to start off with my number 6.
Okay.
So you don't get to talk all the time, because I don't want to just sit here. I agree with you. My number 6 is Stanley Ketchel. Okay, I was making sure you weren't going to say that's mine too. So
No.
But, I mean, you watch old film of Ketchel, it reveals a fighter who some would see as having a hard time in the modern world. He appeared crude. However, sometimes crude works. I mean, heck, after all, recently Ricardo Mayorga and Antonio Margarito fought like that and won championships. Ketchel had a skill set for his time and the ability to get his bombs home against just about anyone in his prime, including Jack Johnson, who he knocked down before Johnson knocked him out. I think he was one of the greatest pure punchers of all time. He died at 24. Similar to Salvador Sanchez, you don't really know what he would have turned out to be. He had a great series with Papke. Papke was a good fighter. Kelly, Klaus. Like I said, it's hard to rank him just because he died at the age of 20. But if you look at the people he fought, to me, the Michigan Assassin is one of the best fighters of all time. But what's your opinion?
I have Ketchel a little higher on my list, but I can't disagree with any of the content. You can't disagree with
anything I said. It's illegal. Because that would make you look dumb, because if you disagreed and you have him at number 3, it's just not going to make much sense.
Right, exactly. My number 6 is D-Hop, Bernard Hopkins. Okay. A modern... he beat Felix Trinidad.
No, he didn't. Not at middleweight. But that wasn't middleweight.
No, he did beat him in middleweight.
Was it a
middleweight?
No,
that was at middleweight. Yeah, it was. Felix Trinidad was murdering everybody at that point, and had just dispatched of William Joffe, who was certainly not a great middleweight, but a pretty decent middleweight champion. He had dispatched him in 5 rounds. Hopkins was a heavy underdog in that fight and absolutely dominated the fight. I'll grant you that The only other Hall of Fame caliber fighter that he beat there was Oscar De La Hoya, who was well above his best weight and past his prime. But there's something for a guy to be said for a guy who reigns for 10 years and defends the title 20 times and cleans out the division. And again, this part isn't necessarily relevant to middleweight, but he's still fighting on at the age of 50 and competing against the best light heavyweights in the world, which I think speaks to the quality of the fighter.
Well, my biggest problem there at middleweight, the best fighter he fought pretty much dominated him, which would have been Roy Jones. Do you have Roy Jones on this list?
I would not. That was relatively early in Hopkins' career.
It was early in Jones' career, too, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 1993. Yeah. They both started about the same year, so,
Yeah, they were both very young at that point. And if you ask me who would be higher on my pound-for-pound list, it would be Roy Jones. But Roy Jones, I think that was really the only significant fight that he had at middleweight, and then he moved up to 168 and 170.
He beat James Toney, who you got in your top 10 also.
Yeah.
So while at middleweight, Roy Jones beat two of the guys you got in your top 10.
But he beat Toney at 168, I believe.
And he beat him at 160, I believe. Want to bet?
Okay.
Because actually, he beat Toney, I think. What year did he beat Toney?
94, I believe.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it would have been middleweight. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. All I know is he beat both guys you had in your top 10. But go ahead. And the other thing is, Hopkins won the title by beating Segundo Mercado, who knocked him down twice. And Hopkins earned a draw, and then he won a rematch, I believe, by a technical decision. He beat John David Jackson, Glenn Johnson. Glenn Johnson was a good fighter. Simon Brown, I think Simon Brown was a little past it then. But, he had trouble with Antoine Eccles.
Yeah.
Antoine Eccles was a good fighter, but he wasn't a great fighter. The Felix Trinidad win's a good win, but Felix, let's face it, he was a one-trick pony. And Felix didn't have the greatest wins in the world either, just because the middleweight division wasn't that good back then. Guys like Keith Holmes and William Joppy were champions at one point or another. And Holmes and Joppy were solid fighters. I'm not calling them bums by any means, but I just don't see the level of competition on there. I could be wrong, and I understand why Hopkins is there, because by doing these lists, there was a couple times I had Hopkins as high as 5 and then as low as 12. So I'm basically just giving you a hard time. But who's your number 5?
Who's my number 5? My number 5 is Stanley Ketchel, for all the reasons that you talked about. One of the hardest punchers in not just middleweight history, but pound for pound ever. Knocked down the heavyweight champion Jack Johnson, beat Billy Papke a couple of times, and guys like Mike Twin Sullivan, Jack Twin Sullivan, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who was a legend. Fought Sam Langford. Very, very, very talented fighter. And I think the Salvador Sanchez analogy is a good one, that unfortunately his career was short before we really found out how good this guy could really be.
And the thing about Sanchez is, he had a bunch of championship fights over about a 2 or 3 year period, so everybody kind of knew what he was. Where Ketchel was kind of robbed of that because he didn't start as a pro when he was 16 or 17 like Sanchez.
Right. It was, his career was brief, but it was explosive and impressive.
All righty. My number 5 is Freddy Steele.
Wow.
What do you mean, wow? You don't like that?
No. The only reason I say that is because Steele almost made my top 10 when I didn't think he would make my top 20. But go ahead.
Steele is a guy that faced 9 champions and beat 8 of them. He had 120 he had over 120 fights by the time he was 24, 25 years old, which I think is a lot of the reason why his career dropped quickly. Because if you look at him, he was stopped 3 of his last 6 fights. But I
I believe he might be the most underrated middleweight in boxing history, but I think there are some reasons for that. He fought the bulk of his career in the Pacific Northwest. And like I said, he had a rapid descent from his peak. But I don't think any of those things can outweigh the body of work he built or the skills that he had. He was an excellent boxer, blessed with speed, great feet to go with finishing power. Like I said, he took no losses in a long. He only had one draw in his first 60 fights. He won everything else. He had a great chin. Yeah, like I said, every stoppage loss he had was in his last 6 fights. I know he had the impact of the sudden death of his manager when he was like 24. He was injured at the age of 24, plus the 120 contests by then. But like I said, the man beat 2 Hall of Famers. He fought 9 world champions and beat 8 of them. That's why Freddy Steele's number 4 for me. Or 5. Sorry about that.
Freddy Steele just missed my list, but very impressed with his career. I agree. He's, if not the most underrated middleweight champion of all time, one of the most underrated middleweight champion of all time. And I would have had him 11 or 12 on my list. I think, yeah, one of the issues with him was that he fought, in the era of the 1930s, which was between the glory eras of the 1920s in the middleweight division and the 1940s, where he had Zale, guys like Zale, Graciano, LaMotta, Cerdan, and all the rest. So the 30s is kind of a forgotten era, but he did defeat some pretty good fighters and only lost, I believe, 5 times in close to 140 bouts.
All righty. My number 4 is Carlos Monsoon, which I think most people usually have in top 3, but, I'm always got to be a little bit different. But regardless of his out-of-the-ring failings, which were great, he was a great fighter, great champion. Hopkins ultimately broke his general consecutive title defenses, but Monsoon still holds the record in a lineal sense, which is the most important thing to me. He won and defended the undisputed crown for all but a handful of his later fights. He made a joke of the fights when he did it, where he didn't, by taking the WBC belt back to where it started. His reign's not without drawbacks. Some of the better names on his record, Griffith and Denny Moyer, were past their peak. The depth of quality in terms of middleweight champions were lacking, but Ben Venuti was an underrated great fighter who he beat. And it took well over a decade. Nobody could figure out how to beat him. And he was one of the rare champions that went out a winner and stayed away that way. But
I have Monsoon a little higher on my list, but I'm not going to argue with anything you said.
Better not. All right.
My number 4 is... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
My number 4 is Sugar Ray Robinson. Obviously, on a pound-for-pound list, which we already did, Sugar Ray was my number 1. He had a great reign at middleweight, too. He won that title 5 times. Beat Jake LaMotta 5 times. Beat Bobo Olson 4 times. Beat Rocky Graziano. Great fight series with Randy Turpin, Carmen Basilio, Gene Fullmer, among others. The only reason he doesn't rank higher on my list is that by the time he got to middleweight, he was a little past it. He was at his best at welterweight, I believe, in my opinion. And for all the great wins, he did lose to guys like Turpin, Basilio, Fullmer, who are not on my top 10. But he gets credit in terms of his competitiveness, his longevity. The guy fought until he was 45 years old. He was never knocked out in nearly 200 fights. So he definitely belongs in the top 5.
Okay, that was your number 4, right?
That was my number 4.
All right, and my number 3 is Sugar Ray Robinson. So, well, Robinson fought some great middleweights. And through the 50s, he beat a lot of them. His longevity, when factoring in his sheer volumes of fights, is remarkable. However, a certain degree of inconsistency, as you said, must be taken into account. I mean, he was virtually unbeatable at welterweight, and I don't think there's any doubt he's the number one welterweight of all time. But that wasn't the case at middleweight. I think aging played a huge factor in that also, as did the layoff between his second and third reigns in determining his place. Had he decided to keep fighting between 52, 55, his defense or his numbers would have grown, and I think they're probably put him in the top two. But so I pretty much agree with you, but I had him at number 3. So who you got at 3?
My number 3 is your number 4, Carlos Monsoon.
Okay.
Undefeated over the final 13 years of his career, undefeated in 80 straight professional fights. Only lost 3 times. He could box. He could punch. Defended. Yeah, he has the record for title defenses for an undisputed champion in the middleweight division with 14 defenses over a 7-year reign. He was one of the 3 best fighters of the 1970s, along with Muhammad Ali and Roberto Duran. He beat Nino Benvenuti twice. He beat Griffith twice, even though, as you said, maybe Griffith was maybe a little past his prime. Rodrigo Valdez he beat twice, who was a really good fighter. He beat Benny Briscoe, who was a really good fighter. He beat Napoles, and maybe Napoles was a little past it too, but this was still Jose Napoles. And yeah, so he definitely has to go down as one of the top 3 middleweights in history, in my view.
All right, so I think we know where this is going with 1, 2. It's just according to what order they're at. There's 2 glaring omissions by both of us, and there should be right now. But before we get to that, just like on TV, I'll be sitting there with my son, and we'll be watching TV, like Survivor or something, and you get to the climactic moment, and all of a sudden it cuts to, and then my son's sitting over there, cussing up a storm. I mean, he says heck and stuff a lot. But so we're going to do that right now, and we got to pay some bills. So go ahead and check out a word from our new sponsor, DraftKings, and we'll be back in about 30 seconds.
Only a few more preseason games to go before the regular season kicks off, and you could start the season by winning $2 million in Week 1 at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. It's the biggest fantasy football contest ever. $10 million in prizes are up for grabs, including $2 million for first place and $1 million for second. One-week fantasy means no season-long commitments. It's fantasy football on demand. Play where you want, when you want, with the players you want. Just pick up your players, pile up the points, and pick up the cash. That's it. You've never experienced football like this. Every game feels like the playoffs, even in Week 1. And every broken tackle or spectacular catch can take you closer to a $2 million prize. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code SPREAKER to play for free for a shot at $2 million in the Week 1 Millionaire Maker. Enter SPREAKER for free entry now at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com.
All right, we're back. Dave, you want to go straight to our number 2, top 10 middleweights of all time?
Yes, my number 2 is, I was going to be a smart aleck and say Floyd Mayweather, but I won't do that. Marvelous Marvin Hagler. A true throwback fighter, a fellow Massachusetts guy, one of my favorite fighters of all time. A record of 62-3-2, 52 knockouts in his career, which easily could have been 66-1. Defeated the Iron of the middleweight division before he won the title against guys like Sugar Ray Seals, Cyclone Hart, Willie the Worm Monroe, Benny Briscoe. The list goes on and on. He got jobbed in his first title shot against Vito Antuofermo in November of 1979. But he corrected that. He corrected that by blowing out Alan Minter in 3 rounds in September of 1980, and ruled the division with an iron fist over the next 6.5 years. Victories over the legendary Roberto Duran, the 3rd round knockout of Tommy Hearns. beat a bunch of other good middleweights like John Mugabe, Tony Sibson,
Juan
Roldan, and the list goes on. And I'll tell you, it was tough. In my view, he and Monsoon are very, very close. But I think the difference is the victory over Hearns. I think Hearns was, Hearns in his prime in 1985 was better than anybody that Carlos Monsoon beat. So that's why Marvelous Marvin gets a slight edge in my view.
Well, Marvin Hagler is also my number 2, so we both know who our number 1 is. But to me, the reason Marvin Hagler is number 2 and not number 1 are 2 fights. The first fight against Vito Anafirma, which I do think he won, but I also think he got gassed after the 10th round, which is what gave them a chance to take that fight from him. I think the other one that is a mark on him is the fight against Duran. I mean, he played it safe, and it was a killer to him. I mean, Duran was a guy he probably should have just walked right through, but he gave him too much respect. It was his first super fight. I don't think there's any doubt he won the fight. And then you got my third problem is the Leonard fight. I believe he won the Leonard fight. But whether you think he won or not, his early strategy to fight right-handed and refuse to pressure Leonard from the outset, combined with one of the worst strategies conceivable, if he was just being Hagler the entire fight, I think he wins the fight easily. I think he got cute. He tried to do stuff that he probably shouldn't have done, and it cost him the fight.
Yeah, I would.
The right-handed thing I still don't understand. And I don't understand the not pressure. He just basically, he didn't even try to cut off the ring against him. He just followed him for the first half of the fight. And then when he starts cutting the ring off, he gets back in the fight. But that made no sense to me. So, I mean, to me, that's why he is not number 1. Now, if I list him on my 10 favorite fighters of all time, he might be. But that's not our list.
Right.
Well, he wouldn't be number 1 because Scott Ledoux would be my number 1. But he'd probably be number 2. Number 1, I'm going to go ahead and do this since you've got to talk more to me. Harry Greb, do you agree?
Yes.
I mean, with Greb, he's one of the few fighters who can contest Sugar Ray Robinson's claim as the greatest who ever lived. He dominated at welterweight. I mean, he was a great welterweight, great middleweight. Everybody he fought, The problem with him, there's no known tapes of him existing. There's a few training film clips that you see. But any man who could get the better of Lofgren, Toney, Walker, Rosenblum, and the Gibbons brothers, it only had basically one good eye. Had to be a hell of a fighter.
Yes.
I mean, come on, he was one-eyed, beating those guys. And, I mean, I'm sorry, but when you consider the competition Hagler beat, I mean, Lofgren, Toney, Toney's to me, he's one of the 10, 15 greatest fighters that ever lived. Mickey Walker, who was already on this list. Rosenblum was a great fighter. The Gibbons brothers, I think the one Gibbons brother actually fought for the heavyweight title. So that's why he's my number 1. What do you think?
I think we're agreeing too much tonight. I think you pretty much said it all. I mean, Harry Greb has, I believe, over 30 wins against International Boxing Hall of Fame fighters. Over 30, which is just utterly mind-blowing when you think about it. He won 45 fights in a row in 1 year, 1999. Everybody crows about Floyd Mayweather Jr.
Why you always got to pick on Floyd? That's why he won't come on the show. I mean, come on. He's tired of you picking on him. You always got to be busting his balls about something.
I like Floyd.
You know what? I'll tell you what. All these people talk about all these fighters. Well, he had 45 fights in a year, okay? I had 45 fights in a year. This is the thing you don't understand. If Harry Greb's ass was making, $300 million for a fight or $30 million for a fight, do you think Harry Greb would have fought 45 times in a year?
No.
So get off Floyd's ass on that. I have my problems with Floyd, too. Guys in the 20s and 30s or the 1910. If Jack Johnson was making $7 million a fight back then, he'd have fought once a year. And then he'd have went around and bought him some hoes and had a good time, and you know it.
Yeah, I would agree there, but you still have to acknowledge the accomplishment, though.
Yeah, but I mean, still, he fought that much because he had to eat. You know, and to compare it to Floyd, I think is very unfair because, number one, there's not a boxing commission in the world that would let a guy fight 45 times in a year anymore.
No. Nor let a guy fight half-blind.
No. I mean, he wouldn't have been allowed to fight. I mean, how weak is society today, damn it?
Yeah.
Won't even let a blind man fight today, but they would back then, and he done beat everybody that had two good eyes.
Yeah, he did, and he won.
Hey, and I can tell you something else, too. I just got a legitimate text from Matt Andrew Scavage, who's the host on my football shows, baseball and basketball with me, to let me know this. Dave, you want a surprise on who a guest is going to be for us in the next couple of weeks?
Sure.
Winky Wright.
Oh, wow. Great.
And he's going to wonder why he wasn't on this list.
Winky's a great fighter.
Oh, Winky was a great fighter. Winky was better than Bernard Hopkins, too.
Yeah, he made I think he made most of his bones at 154.
Yeah, I know. I was just busting your ass a little bit on that one.
Okay.
We agreed so much tonight. We had to have a little bit of controversy at some point.
Yeah.
Hey, but real quick, I want to remind people to check out our sponsor, the Gridiron Mo, at www.gridironmo.com. The NFL season starts next week. We're going to have Eris Presidius from Gridiron Mo on. But make sure you check out that app. It's basically, me and Dave, he can be in Massachusetts or whatever godforsaken place he lives. I can be here in beautiful Indiana. And we can actually compare who makes the most or who can predict the most plays that a team's going to run offensively or defensively. And I know Dave's excited about it.
I'm excited about it and definitely excited about football season coming up, which I'll find out in my home in a van down by the river.
So you actually have a roof over your head now, though.
Yeah.
Huh. I didn't know people in Massachusetts had homes. But I thought y'all just lived by the river and Bill Belichick came out and fed you guys pizza every once in a while. But, all right, that's enough of that crap. But if you're listening to us, make sure you go check out the Grueling Truth Facebook page. Give it a like. Invite all your friends. You can follow Dave at Mythical Boxing, which is a Facebook group page. You still don't have a Twitter, do you, Dave?
I do have a Twitter now. I'm working on setting it up.
Okay, so you don't have a Twitter. All right. But later in the week, we may do another boxing show, too. So hopefully you'll have your Twitter set up by then.
Yeah. These technical challenges.
But, remember, check us out. Also, check out www.gruelingtruth.com. But we're going to get off here now because my cat just puked and I'm going to have to clean it up. And that's not a joke. But, why would somebody as manly as me have a cat? That's another question. But I also have a 100-pound dog, so it's all right to even each other out.
I like that.
So you got any final words tonight, Dave?
A lot of fun again, Mike, and hope the listeners enjoy the show and look forward to doing many more.
Well, we will definitely do more, maybe one even later this week. Just check out the Grueling Truth Facebook page or www.gruelingtruth.com and follow along with the show. But for now, for Dave Siderski, I'm Mike Goodpaster. We'll catch you later on the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.